Okay, so we're back for the, we're coming around the final curve into the home stretch. And we have our bets placed, and we're, no, we're not doing that. So the final portion of our work together today will be to look at 4 case studies to understand them from the perspective of these 3 pathways into gambling. And then to talk a little bit about how we might approach treatment with people who present in this way, and try to fill in some blanks with people I've treated in the past who are similar to these presentations. So before we begin that portion, let's open the floor again to comments, observations, discussion, complaints. Yes, Tess. Okay. Okay. The question is, what textbooks can you read to learn more about this? Actually, just happened to be looking at a website. I was having a conversation about materials available to help clients. If you go to the Hazelden website, and Hazelden, of course, is so famed for all the work it does in addiction. If you go to the Hazelden website, they have a lot of the materials you can put out in your waiting room that people can read, and that's a good place to start because the various publications they have do an excellent job of explaining the foundation of the disorder. There's the book I would read, though, in terms of a textbook that's written to the master's level, is called Counseling Problem Gamblers. The author is Dr. Joseph Shiraki. Okay, Counseling Problem Gamblers. And Dr. Joseph Shiraki, and Shiraki is spelled just like it sounds. C-I-A-R-R-O-C-C-H-I, I believe. Okay? But Joe's textbook, Counseling Problem Gamblers, is a classic in the field. It's excellent. It'll give you a good overview. But I would look at, first of all, I would get the Hazelden materials for your waiting room and read them because they really do an excellent job of giving you an overview of what this disorder is like. Also, if you can find an open Gamblers Anonymous room, go to a few open GA meetings. Delaware, I don't think Delaware has an open meeting, but if you know somebody who has a gambling problem, who's a member of GA, certainly they can ask permission if you can sit in on a meeting. And generally speaking, the GA guys will, if you're a professional in the field, I've sat in on some closed meetings, and the guys usually let you in. It's a good start. Other questions, observations, comments, criticisms related to gambling? The question is there an ASAM type rating for assessing level of care needed for people with gambling problems? No. There's nothing quite like that. The truth is there's not a lot of treatment for people with gambling problems beyond outpatient treatment. So you're not going to find IOPs, partial hospital, and inpatient hospitalization programs for people with gambling problems. Now, if you go to a place like Father Martin's Ashley, do they have a gambling treatment program? I don't think so. But if you go there with a substance problem and you have a gambling problem, they're certainly going to address it. But there's not a lot of options in this area. So if you have somebody who is suicidal, needs inpatient, make sure the inpatient unit is aware that they have a gambling problem. The inpatient units in Delaware do not have gambling treatment experts. Unfortunately, it's hard to find. And it is needed at times because of the suicide rates. It is needed. Yes?
So what is the certification process?
Okay, certification process. The National Council on Problem Gambling has a process to become a National Certified Gambling Counselor, NCGC. 2 levels, level 1 and 2. Level 1, 30 classroom hours of training. You're picking up 6.5 today, is it? 6.5 CEUs, something like that? Okay, so you need 30 classroom hours. You need 100 service hours. So let's say you work in an agency and they say 20% of your job is working with people with gambling problems. And you work a 35-hour work week. Well, that means that 7 out of every 35 hours are gambling hours. So when you get to 100 hours, you have your 100 hours. Or if you volunteer for a helpline, those volunteer hours, 12 hours overnight, towards the 100. And you need, I think it's 20 hours of clinical supervision from someone who has the letters BACC after what other letters he or she has as credentials, BACC. I'm a BACC. I don't know what it stands for. I don't. I know it's highfalutin. It means I've done a lot of stuff. But if you go to the National Council on Problem Gambling, and you will find a list of BACCs. And there are undoubtedly some in the area. Please just turn it off. Okay. So I'm a BACC. I do supervision. And you need 20 supervision hours. It can be group. It can be individual. So the 20 hours of supervision, the 100 hours of service, and then the 30 hours of education. And you've had a start on that today, if this is your first one. That gets you to...
Is that national or is that just for Delaware?
That's national. That's national. So NCGC 1. NCGC 2, the higher level, oh Lord, I think it's... Boy, it's been a while since I've taken someone to that level. I know it's another 30 classroom units of education. I think it's more in the hour. I think it's more like 2,000 hours of service, and maybe 100 hours of supervision. It's a lot more. It's a lot more. Okay. Yes.
So is this recognized by the insurance company?
No. No. NCGC status gets you recognized by local gambling councils. Now, I don't know exactly what the financial arrangements are in Maryland, but I know in Delaware, the Delaware Council on Gambling Problems has providers, outpatient providers, I'm one of them, that it will refer people with gambling problems to, and it will pay for up to 20 sessions. You must be NCGC 1 or 2 in order to get on the referral list. So it's a credential that will be meaningful with the local gambling council in terms of getting referrals from them. Now, third-party payers. When we were in the DSM-4 days, which we're still in, of course, because most insurers have not yet adopted the DSM-5, generally speaking, I have found insurers do not reimburse for diagnosis of pathological gambling because, of course, those people don't need clinical services. They don't need counseling. Wait a minute. Okay. That's not right. But they don't reimburse. Fortunately and unfortunately simultaneously, people with gambling problems almost always come in with a comorbid Axis I diagnosis, depression, anxiety, something. So, of course, you have the person with a gambling problem who's also suicidally depressed. The billing code is going to be the depression if it's a third-party payer. Just is what it is. Now, with the transition in the DSM-5 to putting gambling in the addiction section, and addictions, of course, in DSM-4 are reimbursable diagnosis codes, perhaps we'll see a change in that, one hopes. Okay.
So every state has a council?
Yes, all 50 states have a gambling council, and I should know. I don't know exactly how the Maryland Council handles referrals and provider lists and things like that. But there are treatment dollars available. I just don't know if they're available to individual treatment professionals or agency level. I'm not sure. Other questions? Observations?
What is the LC something after your PhD? That's
LPCMH? Yeah. Okay, my letters. PhD, that stands for PhD. LPCMH, Licensed Professional Counselor of Mental Health. Okay.
for Delaware?
For Delaware. And then if I did everything, NCC, National Certified Counselor, NCGC 2, National Certified Gambling Counselor 2, and then AANG, all around nice guy. Or MM, married male. What?
Board-approved clinical consultant.
You're the man. Board-approved clinical consultant. That's what I am. Well, I'm a board-approved. That sounds impressive, actually. I am board-approved clinical consultant. Oh, right. I've never known what that was. I just thought it was back. Other questions and observations?
Is there, obviously polysubstance can, I'm sure, happen with common gambling as well. Is there a substance that tends to be more usually found?
Booze. Alcohol. Yeah. With the substance issues, alcohol. Alcohol. It's a big one.
So in that light, I mean, I'm sure that at the end of the day, anyone can get something out of going to, if they can't find a GA meeting in AA
Sure.
or something of the sort, would you automatically kind of refer them if there's nothing in the area to go to an AA or an AA meeting and
Well,
more so if there's time?
Not only if their alcohol use was at least on the abuse level. Okay, I really would hesitate to send somebody to an AA meeting who had a gambling problem and drank a bit, but wasn't drinking out of control by any means. If it at least reached the alcohol abuse level, then yeah, maybe I would do that. The thing you have to be careful about is you want to make sure if you do have somebody with a gambling and an alcohol problem, and you're going to recommend, look, I think GA and AA are good things to do here, is you want to make sure the person understands that whoever they get as a sponsor needs to be gambling addiction savvy. Now, believe me, you walk into an AA room with 30 people in it, there's going to be a good handful of people who, when you say, I need a sponsor who also understands gambling addiction, there's going to be a good handful that say, oh, okay, yeah, I've been there. I have a guy right now who's addicted to heroin, gambling, and alcohol. He showed up in an AA meeting and said, I need a sponsor who gets alcoholism, heroin dependence, heroin addiction, gambling addiction. And he said, a guy, oh, yeah, that's me. I do that. I've been sober 10 years. I can help you. What I love about 12-step rooms is it's the kidders club, and you can't kid a kidder, right? It's all the guys who've told all the stories and all the lies, and they know the game. So, sending somebody to AA is good if they do have an alcohol problem, or NA if it's a narcotics problem. What I like about when you do have somebody who has an alcohol or narcotics problem is I think that AA especially, but also NA, do better step work. And the step work, to me, is the key. Until you do a fourth and fifth step, you're not owning your stuff. You need to own it, but you need to own it when you're ready to own it. And then once you've owned it, then you might be ready to make your amends and then start to live life a little bigger than the way you've been living it. How many times do people say, I don't need the steps, I'll make amends and then everybody will like me? I love that one. How come nobody likes me even though I'm making amends? Well, because you're still acting like a jerk. Because you didn't do all the step work. Come on. Okay, tangent. Bring it back. Yeah, I'm here. Okay, so other observations, questions, concerns? No? Okay. So, quick review. 3 subtypes. Grew up around it. Family, neighborhood, became a habit, wasn't a problem, wasn't a problem, starting to be a little bit of a problem. I'm in my 30s now, it's more of a problem, and oh my God, what's going on? I get in my 40s, and now it's a problem. It's habituated, and it probably is causing anxiety, depression, and I got some distortions about what it's about, cognitive distortions. And then the person who really isn't a gambler or much of a gambler, and then life happens hard, and very vulnerable, poor coping skills, gambling helps in a way, becomes habituated. This may be a person who has a history of trauma and then gets re-traumatized a little bit later on in life. And then the high impulse ADHD crowd, this is the polysubstance crowd. These are the people who try everything. 1 is good, 6 are better. You know, I had a guy tell me one time, the thing I love about Quaaludes is a Quaalude is a six-pack and a pill. And I say, so if you want to get the buzz from a six-pack, you take a Quaalude. No, I take about 4. I said, okay, what's wrong with this picture? He's been in recovery for 25 years, and boy, the stories. What he remembers, of course. So the high impulse person. Okay, so let's take a look at some case studies. We'll start with Linda. You don't have this narrative in your, I don't think you have this in your packet. Okay. So I'm sorry, it is small print, so I will read it for the benefit of the nearsighted up front and the well-sighted in the back. Linda is a 54-year-old widow. She began gambling more heavily after her husband died. Now, so far, we don't have any diagnostic criteria met. You may want to get your criteria sheet out, because I think you have that, right? Yeah. Okay. But we suspect with this second sentence that one of the criteria might be getting met. Which criteria? Take a look at the criteria. One of them might be getting met. We don't know for sure. She began gambling more heavily after her husband died. Okay, relief from distress. Okay. She has no history of other addictions, but has struggled with depression since her husband's death. So now we're getting a stronger sense of that criteria being met, the escape from dysphoric mood, from distress. She's been in counseling for depression, never talked about her gambling, and that's not unusual. You know, if you don't ask the question, people don't tell you. I had a guy, a case I just did for the public defender's office, guy who was a sex offender who had been sexually assaulted horribly by his mother throughout his childhood. And he had been seeing a therapist for a year, about 2 years ago. And I said, I read the therapist's notes. There was no mention of the sexual abuse by your mother. I said, why didn't you tell him? And he said this. He didn't ask. He never asked if I had any history of sexual contact as a child. I said, really? He said, really. Didn't ask. But you know what? Sex gives everybody the heebie-jeebies. And sometimes counselors are afraid to ask that. We can't be. Somebody's got to ask the question. Okay, she never talked much about gambling. As losses mounted, she became increasingly desperate, trying to win back the money she lost. She is, hey, you got 100%. Okay, so we got 2 criteria met here, probably. Okay. She had kept the extent of her gambling hidden for several years, and her family was shocked when they found out about the extent of the financial losses. What criteria did we just get met? She's been lying about it. Okay. But financial losses, so not only lying, but it's having an impact on relationships. Okay? So we'll probably have 4 criteria. We have made the diagnosis. Yes. Houston, we have a problem. She gambled away all of the inheritance she received. Probably loss of control, but we don't know for sure. Including her son's portion. That money belonged to her son. It's a crime, isn't it? Now, in the old DSM-4, that was a criteria. But we fixed all that, so they dropped it. No, it's not, it doesn't differentiate enough because it's almost ubiquitous. She's living with her son and his family as she can't afford to maintain mortgage payments on her own. And her son had to pay several months back mortgage payments so that the home would not be lost. Well, that's not all criteria, but it's having an impact on her. Oh, yeah, that's right. It's a, duh. 5. That's a bailout, of course. She became severely depressed and attempted suicide shortly after having her son and his family move in. So we have at least 5 criteria met out of 9. Now, you know, if we had something longer than that paragraph, we might see all 9. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at the pathway 1, 2, 3. Okay. Pathway 1, I grew up around it. It just gradually came. Okay, no. Pathway 2, something bad happened. Okay, this is pathway 2 gambler. Yeah, yeah. Something bad happened. I fell into a psychological vulnerability. Okay, I didn't have the coping skills. And by the way, that doesn't mean that the person doesn't have good coping skills. When your spouse of 30, 40, 50 years dies suddenly and unexpectedly, that's a hard thing to cope with. It's almost impossible. Obviously, being in a church community, strong network of friends and family, all these things help. But these are hard things to cope with. Okay, so it's a pathway 2 gambler. So let's brainstorm a little bit. Linda comes in to see you. For some reason, she had to stop seeing this counselor. You know, something happened, insurance ran out, who knows? And you have this information. You know about the suicide attempt. She comes in to see you. What's your treatment plan going to look like? Where are you going to start? This is what I just heard. Okay, okay, raise your hand. We got a hand in the back.
I would start with the grief. You know, is it acute? Is it chronic? Is there any resolution?
Okay, so one of the goals in the treatment plan is going to be to resolve the grief so that it can be lived with. Okay, that's my second goal. What's my first goal? Yes. Safety. Safety is first goal. Okay, so we have suicide risk. By the way, what is the empirical evidence about suicide contracts? Do they work? No. Now, I'm not against doing them, okay? I'm just against believing that it just made a big difference. I think it's a nice therapeutic tool. I think it helps the conversation about suicide tremendously. So I'm in favor of doing them, putting them in the file, having the person go home with a copy of it, and if the family is really keyed into what's going on and it's all out in the open, just putting it on the fridge so people can point at it, bless you. And on the suicide contract, I got a nice list of coping behaviors. If you're starting to feel suicidal, you're going to do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. But don't think that you just stopped and closed the suicide door. But it's not a bad thing to have. Because, okay, so suicide, suicide assessment, suicide safety. And of course, the more people talk about suicide, the more likely they are to not commit suicide. Most people are in contemplation stage of change when it comes to the issue of suicide. If they were in action stage, you wouldn't even be having the conversation, they just would be doing it. Sad but true story. I had a guy in Delaware Hospital, I won't say that, well, guy in Delaware Hospital, okay, who was sending my intern out to do a home visit with an elderly man whose wife had just died, who had past history of suicide attempts, was suicidally depressed, and had guns in the house. And he was sending my intern out. She called me on the road and said, Dr. Walsh, do you really think I should be doing this? I said, absolutely not. Turn around. And I called him. He said, he's not going to commit suicide. I know he won't. I said, why not? That's what he said to me. He just bought a new vacuum cleaner. Nobody, why would somebody buy a vacuum cleaner if they're going to kill themselves? I said to clean up the house. Because when people decide they're going to commit suicide, they want to leave something behind in order. He might have the house painted, have it all done, so that his children get this. He said, well, I'm going out to see him. I said, bring crisis. He's got guns in the house. Yeah. Oh, well. So, suicide is number one. Number two is the grief processing. But I would say it depends. Grief might be three. Because if this person, Linda, is still gambling, what's the impact of continued gambling on her suicidality? Okay, this is shame-driven suicide. This is a woman who ran her house probably for years, successfully. She blew her son's inheritance. That'll take you out. Okay, I'm sorry? No, two would be gambling behavior. I want to get the gambling arrested because as long as she's still gambling, she's feeding into the shame machine. And the shame machine feeds into the suicide machine, which is number one. So if I can get the gambling arrested, then I want to look at the grieving. Because until I resolve the grief, and this is the way I would think, until I can resolve this grief, I don't know that I can get to the shame. Okay? So if I stop the bleeding with the gambling, if the suicidality gets under control, if we begin a good process of grieving, then I think we can get to the boundary issue, because I think the boundary issue is really about forgiving. Self-forgiveness, other forgiveness, healing in the family, and then the natural boundaries can be reestablished. Now, the boundary setting we need to do around the money for the gambling, that's part of the second goal. Get the gambling under control. That's part of that. Yes?
Would the gambling, keeping the gambling under control involve the family at that point?
Absolutely. Yeah, for this kind of a gambler, you want the family involved. Now, you may have an angry tribe of people coming in your door, and they may be doing a lot of this. Her. And then when you say addiction is a family disease, you get, "What you talking about, Willis? I'm not sick. She's sick. She's the one with the problem." But then you noodle around a little bit, and what you find is a closed family system. You find something that Salvatore Minuchin would just, he'd be in heaven to come out, or Virginia Satir, or any of the great family theorists. You find that there's all kinds of dysfunction in the family. And you find out maybe that Linda grew up as the scapegoat in the family, took that role. You know, who knows? Who knows what you find? But yes, the family must be involved. Now, let's say you have a reasonably healthy family. Well, the first thing you're going to go to is to get money out of Linda's hands. And you can do that. People can take power of attorney, accounts can be set up, shut down. All those things can be done. I had a guy named Tony who was actually a type 1 gambler, long habituated, gambled every day of his life from age 7 or 8 till he was 80 without problem. Little Italian fella from Little Italy in the neighborhood, gambled every day, never a problem, a quarter here on the number, play a pony now, call the bookie, play a pony. And then when he turned 80, he had a heart attack. He'd been retired 15 years. His life was working in his vegetable garden and then canning and freezing all those things he grew all summer. He was a very happy old Italian guy. And then he had a heart attack, and this is what the doctor said. He said, "Tony, you can't be digging in the garden anymore. You'll kill yourself." Well, not digging in the garden was death for Tony. Tony lived in a neighborhood called Murray Manor. If you live in Delaware, you know where Murray Manor is. Walking distance to Delaware Park. What did Tony start doing? Doctor said you need to walk for exercise, about 2 miles. Where did Tony walk? About a month into this period, Tony cashed in a $10,000 CD and used that to gamble. It was his money. He was married to Maria. Maria was this tall and that wide. She was large and in charge. And when Maria saw the $10,000 CD had been cashed, they brought their son and he got complete financial power of attorney, all the money taken away from Tony. Maria comes walking into my office like this. She sits down, Tony sits down, their adult daughter sits down. She says, "He has a gambling problem, fix him." He looks at me like this. I said, "What happened?" The adult daughter tells me what I just told you. And Tony, I look at Tony and he's sitting there like that. I said, "Tony, you look so depressed." His wife says, "We took him to the doctor. The doctor said he's depressed. Put him on this thing called Prozac." I'm thinking, okay, that's a good thing. He took it last Thursday. He woke up Friday. I said, "How are you feeling?" He said, "I still feel depressed." So I flushed that stuff. It doesn't work. I looked at the daughter. She went, "What am I going to do?" So I said, "Let me talk to Tony alone." So I talked to Tony alone. I said, "Tony, what's going on?" He says, "My wife, she could drive you crazy." I said, "How long have you been married?" He said, 60 years. I said, "You're going to divorce her?" He said, "No, what am I going to do?" I said, "Tony, are you going to gamble anymore?" He says, "I have no money. How can I gamble?" I said, "How about we meet 10 times, we can have pleasant conversations, and we can talk about finding meaning and purpose in your life." That's the focus of the therapy. This is how these things unfold sometimes. Tony died about a year ago. I saw his obituary. And, you know, he had no money, so couldn't gamble. But anyway, Linda, you've done a nice job here. Suicide, okay. Get the gambling arrested, get it under control. The grieving process, okay. Restoration of relationship with family, probably some forgiveness therapy that's going to be needed, okay. The boundary setting is going to be done with the gambling piece. And the Lindas of the world usually are very amenable to somebody taking over the finances. They want to be protected from themselves. The Lindas of the world have very few skills deterring this behavior. They want someone to help them. It's the Lindas of the world that can do the self-exclusion, and it works. Because when you say to Linda, if you go there, you'll be arrested, Linda's not going to be arrested. She's not tolerating that. It's not going to happen. And there's a lot of Lindas out there. A lot of Lindas. Yes?
Financial contracts aren't an option. What if there are no supports available to take over
Yeah.
power of attorney or be a
Yeah. The question is, what if there are no financial options here with the rep payee, somebody who can take POA, that sort of thing? That's a problem. Because now the person has to learn to manage his or her own money. And that's been a problem. They've been unable to do that. So, yeah, there's no easy answer to your question. It's like saying to a heroin-addicted person, but you got to walk around with a pocket full of OxyContin. You know, but you can't take it. Well, you can take one a day, but just one. How does that work, by the way? Not too well. Okay, so it's difficult, and this is where getting into a fellowship, getting a sponsor, this is where the motivation, the motivational interviewing is so important. Keeping the person strongly motivated for change is just so important because it's going to be a real slog. This is a person you might see 2, maybe even 3 times a week. Well-being calls over the weekend early on. Okay, I have a guy who's that person. He has nobody to help him, and his first paycheck since he started seeing me gets direct deposited tomorrow morning, or tomorrow at midnight, Thursday at midnight for Friday morning. And we have set up a 6 a.m. call because he can direct debit from his checking account where he has a direct deposit over to his rent account. And so I said, if I call you at 6 a.m., he said, that would really help me to talk me through actually doing that. Okay, so yeah, this is the extent you have to go sometime. He's not connected yet into the GA community. When he is connected into the GA community, this is where a sponsor can really be helpful for this sort of thing. Yeah, when there's no financial support network that you can tap into, it's really difficult, really difficult. Having paychecks direct deposited, setting up direct payments out of an account to pay utility bills and things like, as much as you can automate helps. But of course, that takes volition on the part of the gambler. And that's motivation. So, yeah. The good thing when you don't have that support network is if the person does those things, the sense of self-efficacy, because they're doing it, is very strong. So there's a sense of, I did this. And that's good. That's good. Other observations and questions before we move on? Okay. It's kind of fun. Jose is in recovery from alcohol and coke dependence. As soon as you see alcohol, central nervous system depressant, and coke, stimulant, 1, 2, or 3 pathway. It's 3. The high impulse. As soon as you see that, think, oh my God, this may well be one of the high impulse types. Since he has been clean from substances, he's been able to pay bills with the money left over. Hooray! That's good. Okay. He was never very good managing money, tending to spend on whatever caught his attention. 3, high impulse. So far, no symptoms of gambling. After buying groceries, he started buying lottery tickets. Well, why not? Why not? They're there. Where do they put the lottery tickets? At the checkout. That's stupid. National Enquirer, Star Magazine, and the lottery tickets. They're all there. All the things you would never buy if you thought about it, but I want to find out what scandal Tom Hanks is in right now. Okay, so after buying groceries, he started buying the lottery tickets. Well, we still don't have any diagnostic criteria. One time he won $500 and felt a rush like he used to have when using. Well, it's the reward pathway. Don't leave home without it. The next day, he could hardly wait to go back to the store to buy some tickets. So this is the high impulse guy. This is a 3. No criteria met yet. He began going to the convenience store, misspelling there, sorry, on the corner of his street more often, especially when he felt bored at night. We have a criteria met. To relieve, relieve distress. Boredom is distress. Boredom doesn't feel good. Try it sometime. You won't like it. Okay. The kind of feeling he used to get when he used to drink and get high. He became more focused on numbers throughout the day, anticipating which numbers would be lucky to play that day. So now we have the preoccupation, right? 2, dos. He would lie to his girlfriend. 3. About just going to get some cigarettes in order to get more tickets. The girlfriend started getting upset because he didn't have money to go to movies or concerts, the important things, and she thought he was using again. So now it's affecting relationships. 4. Houston. We have the diagnosis. When he didn't have money to buy tickets, he would become irritable and easily frustrated. Okay, 5. He's got some withdrawal. He began making up stories to borrow money from coworkers to get money to play in the lottery. He's lying. 6. Not a bailout yet. He's lying. 6. His job for UPS made it easy to stop and buy tickets during the day. But he was starting to get into trouble for running late with deliveries. Well, we already have an impact on relationships. And that criteria is relationship, career, it's all of it bundled together. And his boss was not accepting excuses about running into traffic. How much traffic is there in Cecil County anyway? Come on. Okay. So we got 6 criteria, bang, 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 bang. May even have 9, but we got 6. So we got a gambler. And we have a high impulse gambler with a recovery history. So Jose walks in, Esmeralda, his girlfriend's dragging him by the ear. She sits him down, and she says, fix him. Okay. So what's your treatment plan look like for Jose, do you think? High impulse. What's going to be number 1 on your treatment plan?
I would want to rule out the possibility of just ADHD, so I could have a baseline to work from.
Yeah, I don't think you have to rule it out. I think it's ruled in.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, with the cocaine history, lots of psychiatrists are going to write the script for Concerta. No, they're not going to. Okay. It ain't happening. Okay. So does Jose appear to be a suicide risk from this description? We're not, okay. So we're not too worried about that. Yes?
I would definitely rule out if he was using again, so I would be urine analysis.
Okay. So,
Rule all that out.
okay. So yeah, probably a good idea to do a P-test, make sure he's not using again. But we're thinking in terms of the treatment plan, assuming he's not using coke and so forth again. Yes? Yeah. Goal number 1 is to arrest the gambling. Now, if we're going to arrest the gambling, the first thing we have to assess for is where he is in stages of change. Where is he? And remember, in my opinion at least, I think you get a lot further with the guy who's in pre-contemplative stage, simply saying it doesn't seem to be a problem to you at this point in your life, you're what's called pre-contemplative, than saying you're in denial. Especially because this guy's 12-step history. So he knows in denial is not, it's not a compliment. Okay, so we want to arrest the behavior. We want to get a stage of change assessment. Yes?
That's what I said. I'd probably get him connected with NA or AA, potentially.
There you go.
Get him a sponsor that understands.
Okay, so part of his treatment plan, part of that first goal to arrest the gambling behavior, get back into the fellowship. Okay?
He needs a lot of education to recognize that his behaviors are very similar to what he was actively.
Okay, so a lot of psychoeducation. Okay? And if you can get a release, if Jose has a sponsor, if you can get a release from Jose, you call the sponsor and you say, guess what? Jose has had a relapse, but not into substance. He's had a relapse into addiction. But the substance this time isn't cocaine or alcohol, it's gambling. Now, if the sponsor says, oh, gambling, give me a break, then you help Jose find a new sponsor. But again, you know, most people are getting savvy these days to this. So, first thing with Jose is arrest the gambling behavior, which begins with an assessment. Where is he in the stages of change? And where he is going to dictate what we do. If he is in pre-contemplative or contemplative stage of change, change strategies will be met with resistance. Now, telling Jose, I think it's a good idea for you to go back to AA, may not be met with resistance, because when is it a bad idea to go to an AA meeting if you are an alcoholic? It's never a bad idea. Okay? And if the guy says it's a bad idea, then you wonder, has he relapsed alcohol? Okay? So, getting back in the program, arresting the gambling behavior based on stage of change. Okay, what's goal number 2 here? Got another problem. It's not, there's not only one diagnosis code here. Well, there's not just the addiction codes. You've got a V code. I don't know if the DSM-5 is V codes anymore. Yeah, partner relationship problem. Okay? So Esmeralda needs some psychoeducation, some talk about boundaries, limits, Gam-Anon, Al-Anon, whatever. Okay? How to not... I'm sorry? I can't hear you.
She's fed up.
Darn right she is. But we're assuming that she still is invested in the relationship. So if she's still invested in the relationship, we have to determine her stage of change. Is she contemplating getting out? Is she contemplating staying in? Is she ambivalent? She may be in action stage. I'm all in. I want to make this work. Jose's a great guy when he's not using. Or she may be ready to step out. But we need to know that. And it's part of the treatment plan to redefine the relationship. Okay? We got to get there. It's very important. Psychoeducation piece with her, helping her understand what this is, setting boundaries. These are all important things. Okay. Any other observations here on this kind of a case? Okay. Tony. Not the Tony I talked about. 82-year-old divorced male. Gambled throughout his life. Pathway 1, probably. Maybe not, but we're going to see. Including risky stock market investments in which he lost his son's college fund. Okay, that's not illegal because his name was on the college fund. So we're not into an illegal activity. But impairment in family relationship, remember, okay, is probably met. We probably have one criteria. Gambling increased following his divorce 12 years ago. What suggests the response to the distress? Suggested, may or may not. He states gambling is the only activity that can calm him down when he becomes angry and frustrated. So now we have gambling to relieve distress. Okay. Gambles from a sense of loneliness and boredom. Well, that reinforces that. Okay. Holiday weekends are particularly difficult. Currently, he gambles primarily on slot machines and playing Texas Hold'em at the casino. Able to go months without going to the casino. So we have the episodic specifier here, right? But when he goes, he rarely comes out with any money. So out of control, gambles more than he intended. Okay? And often uses the ATM to get additional money. Now, that's gambling more than he intended. But what do we suggest? We can infer that it may be. We're going to ask the chasing question here. When you get that extra money, why do you get it? Well, you know, I'm not going to walk. I lost $300. I need to get that back. Okay. We got you. I got you. He will, so probably a fourth. He will occasionally buy scratch-offs in between casino visits, but manages not to spend more than intended on lottery purchases. And this is a very interesting phenomenon, and we do see this a lot. If the only thing Tony did was buy scratch-offs, we wouldn't diagnose him. So the fact that he buys scratch-offs in between the binges does not make him continuous necessarily. We can still call him an episodic gambler, very much like the binge drinker, I might add. We can still call him an episodic gambler because the buying of the scratch-offs doesn't meet the criteria in and of itself. Now, it's a nuance. How important is it? Well, maybe it is. Within the past 2 years, he has not borrowed money from friends or family for gambling. That's good, although he has at times spent much of his fixed income on gambling and had to really scrimp to make it through a month. Okay, so this is clearly a pathway 1 gambler. Okay, it got worse when he got divorced. So it's also got elements of pathway 2, doesn't it? He gambles especially from loneliness and boredom when he's frustrated and angry. So maybe that's attributable to the divorce. So you see we have a little bit of both, don't we? And that's the things with typologies. And that includes the DSM typologies. They don't always fit neatly into categories. So Tony is pathway 1, pathway 2, a little bit of both. A little bit of both. So Tony comes through your door seeking treatment. What do you want to do with Tony? Yeah.
First thing I would focus on is getting him into some kind of fellowship if he's willing
Okay.
to connect him. Because it seems like that really is the core root of what's going on possibly.
Okay.
And the gambling is part of his identity, so to try to address that right up front may not, and the consequences aren't quite so severe that it's causing significant issues in his life.
Okay. So let's say, now Tony's been gambling for, let's say, about 60, 65 years. Okay? And he's never been to GA, AA, any of those things. He's scrimping to make it, but he's getting by. And you say you need to go to GA. What do you think Tony's going to say to you?
No, I'm not talking about GA. I'm talking about some kind of fellowship. Or not GA.
Oh, well, yeah.
Connecting him with
Yeah. Fellowship's always good. Okay.
relationships.
Okay. Okay, so now what you're suggesting then is a treatment goal. I'm not going to say what his first, so who knows. But one of the treatment goals is to socialize Tony. Get Tony into a network, a connected network. Okay, so a treatment goal is going to be to relieve boredom and loneliness. Now, Tony comes in, and you say to him, Tony, you have a gambling problem. Just like that. You have a gambling problem. What do you think the likely response is? Or it's a problem, but it's not that big a deal. You know, gambling problems are like head colds. They really are. The rhinitis virus, when it gets into your upper nasal sinuses and passageways, causes a head cold. If it drips down into your upper throat area, you have a head cold and a cough. If it migrates south, you might get bronchitis And if it continues south, you may have pneumonia. Okay? Same virus. 4 different illnesses, but same virus. Treatment's same, chicken soup. Okay. Any Jewish mother will tell you. And chicken soup actually helps. Okay. Now, gambling disorders are the same way. It's the same illness, but there's the head cold version, the sore throat and head cold version, the bronchitis version, and the pneumonia version. Now, we know that the pneumonia version will kill you. Linda is at pneumonia. Jose is probably at sore throat. Tony's got bronchitis. How many of you know people, including possibly yourself, who go to work with bronchitis? Yeah, I knew it was you. You had that look about you. Of course. Yeah. How many of you have gone to work coughing? I had a secretary years ago in my sales career, and I had bronchitis so bad that she came in and she said to me, if you don't go home, I'm calling your wife and saying we're having an affair. She was about 30 years older than me, but she looked the part. It turned out I actually had pneumonia, and I was still going to work because I'm a big dope. And I went to the doctor, fainted, and he said, you have pneumonia. What are you doing going to work? Oh, I got a sales plan I got to make. I said, you're dying, you dope. Go home. And I was home for 2 weeks, but I still worked. So Tony has the bronchitis version. And here's the thing. Tony's learned how to live with bronchitis. It's not pleasant having bronchitis, but you can learn how to live with it. You ever meet somebody with a smoker's cough? Do they all quit smoking when they have the smoker's cough? And it can be really horrible sounding, the smoker's cough. Keep smoking, because you've learned how to live with it. You've adapted to it. Tony's adapted to this. If you bomb him with, you have a gambling problem, he's out the door. So here's what I say to Tony. Tony, what I'm hearing is a lifetime of broken relationships. Your wife's left you. Gambling was related to that. You squandered your son's college fund. He won't have anything to do with you for gambling. You're able to get by, but barely, because of gambling. You're home, you're alone, you're broken. What can I do? What do you want to get? If we're successful in our counseling, what will be the outcome? I always ask that question anyway. And I think that Tony's going to say, I'm just so damn lonely. I'm just so damn lonely. And so I like your treatment idea. I think our goal, first one Tony's going to say is treat the loneliness. Now, Tony, of course, is going to meet criteria for gambling disorder. I say to Tony, Tony, what about your gambling? Should we address that? Well, no, that's my gambling. That's the only time I have fun. Are you crazy? That's when I'm not lonely. So he's pre-contemplative stage, right? So what's your job when somebody's in pre-contemplative stage for this problem? Develop a therapeutic alliance on the problem they're willing to work on. All roads lead to Rome. If Tony truly has a problem with gambling, working on relationship problems, gambling is going to come up over and over again. It's going to come up. Working on financial problems, gambling is going to come up. So what you're telling me is your family won't have anything to do with you because of the money you spend gambling. But I understand you don't want to address the gambling as a problem, but okay, we'll just keep that in mind. You just keep it out there. And eventually you go for some consciousness raising. The other thing is, let's think in terms of Erickson's psychosocial stages of development. Those of you who've had your human development course within recent memory, 82-year-old person from Erickson's psychosocial standpoint, what are the issues for the 82-year-old person?
Reflecting on his life and that
Okay. Despair versus what? Despair versus, yeah, something like that, yeah. Integrity versus despair. So I want to look at my life and see it as a life that was worth living. That when I died, the eulogy is going to be pretty cool. People are going to miss me. I've done some good in this world. I want to leave that behind. So an important part of our therapy here comes right out of Yalom and Frankl, all the existential stuff. Meaning and purpose in your life. And for Tony, he looks at a life of wreckage. So making social connection is important. How can we bring meaning and purpose? How can you leave a legacy behind? I hit 60 in October. It's the first time the word legacy meant something to me personally. I started to think, 60, my God. You know, you're still an Adonis of a man, but what did I say about a good illusion? Good illusion? Yeah. You know, it's funny. I look in the mirror and I see this young guy with hair. And then I say, who are you? Pre-contemplative, yeah. But you know, Erickson was right. I mean, 60 is not that old. People tell, oh, 60 is the new 50. I said, hey, 50 wasn't so good either. But you begin to think, what am I leaving behind? For my children? You know, I've been fortunate to be a professor in a counseling program. Am I leaving behind people who are going to help other people? You know, will someday somebody think, oh, I learned that from Dr. Walsh, rest in peace? That's a comforting thought. I want to help Tony to have this thought as well. And you know, nobody's done all bad and nobody has done all good. Okay? Bad people have some good in them and good people have some bad in them. Sue is a 57-year-old Caucasian single female, never married. Gambled at the casino slots for the last 10 years. No other history of addiction or mental health issues. She was arrested for embezzlement from the nonprofit agency of which she was the CEO. She has always had difficulty expressing feelings and believes gambling served as an emotional pressure relief valve. Currently on probation, attends GA and treatment. Currently works doing home repairs and landscape. Well, the nonprofits aren't hiring her these days. Doing home repairs and landscaping and makes enough for living expenses. Living with friends. Had nearly a year of abstinence from gambling when she had a brief relapse, including 2 gambling episodes, during which time she took money from a friend's checking account for gambling. She feels frustration with the relationship was a key trigger for this relapse. Frustration with the relationship was a key trigger for the relapse. After 1 weekend episode, she returned to try to recoup losses. After the second episode of losing, she called her counselor to report the relapse and confessed to her friend about taking money. Now she's not gambled for the past 3 months. Now, this is a really mixed bag, isn't it? Okay. So this isn't a person who grew up in a gambling environment and just learned to gamble and gambled over the years. She's 57, didn't gamble till 10 years ago. And she's not a person who began gambling 10 years ago as a way to escape problems. Though she blames her relationship with her boyfriend, you know, we don't have some crisis. Like my new guy, 6 years ago, his 2-year-old daughter died. And he began gambling after that. Okay. Shortly before that, he'd been arrested. African-American gentleman arrested, put into a chokehold for suspicion of robbery. He was moving out of his apartment, moving his furniture into a van, and a cop chokeholded him, threw him to the ground, arrested him on suspicion of robbery. This was shortly after his 2-year-old died. Second time I saw him when he told me this was right after all the stuff came out about this guy in Staten Island, Garner. And I was like, how you doing these days? He said, not too good. I said, so if you look in your rearview mirror and see a police car, he says, I pull over. Get out of the way, let him go past me. Can't blame the guy. So, okay, editorial comment, done. Okay, so over to Sue again. We don't really have an event that happened, like my guy, the death of his child and this horrible arrest. Pathway 3, this is probably more likely. High impulse. Probably more a high impulse person. But she doesn't really fit neatly, does she? She doesn't really fit neatly into any of these categories. And see, that's the problem with these categories. They're categories. Meet a gambler. You've met a sample of 1 from a population of 1. She doesn't really fit very neatly. She's probably high impulse in general. Okay, so let's look for diagnostic criteria. Okay, okay, so she was arrested for embezzlement from the agency of which she was CEO. Not a criteria. In the DSM-4 days, if the embezzlement had been to fund gambling, then she would have met a criteria, but we're in the DSM-5 days now. Okay. She's always had difficulty expressing feelings. Well, that's not a criteria. And believes gambling served as an emotional pressure relief valve. That is a criteria. Okay, so we got 1. Okay. Escape. Currently on probation, attends GA and treatment. Okay, that's good. Works doing home repairs and landscaping and makes enough for, okay, that's good. Living with friends. Nearly a year of abstinence from gambling, brief relapse, including 2 gambling episodes. So that suggests loss of control. Okay, and we're going to reinforce the loss of control if the embezzlement was to get money to pay gambling debt, then maybe even a bailout, but at least loss of control. During that time, she took money from a friend's checking account for gambling. Now, that's illegal, of course, but that's no longer a criteria, but it does affect relationship, and if the embezzlements were for gambling debt, then it's affecting relationship and career, which are lumped into one criteria, so now we have 3 criteria, okay? She feels frustration with the relationship was a key trigger for this relapse, so gambling to take care of distress, but we already had that one, so we're still at 3, okay? After a weekend episode, she returned to recoup losses. Now we got chasing, so now we have a diagnosis. After the second episode of losing, she called the counselor, reported the relapse, confessed to her friend about taking the money, and has gambled for 3 months. So, okay, so we got 4 criteria met, which makes it gambling disorder mild. She's out of work because of gambling. Nobody wants to talk to her anymore. She's broke, but it's mild. Well, chances are if we interviewed Sue, we'd find the other criteria were met. Okay, probably would. Yes?
The first thing that stands out here is, do we know why it started 10 years ago when she was 47?
It doesn't, the vignette doesn't say.
Yeah, that would be the thing that I want to understand.
Yeah.
Get back to your idea of trying to understand someone.
Right. So, you know, that's part of the interview process. 47-year-old single female who begins to gamble. Why? What started? That's going to be important. So chances are with this person, we're going to find that when she doesn't gamble, she feels bored and listless. And we're going to interpret that as withdrawal. We're probably going to find that she had tolerance build up. That's what led to the embezzlement. She needed more and more cash. So we're probably going to get to 7, 8, or 9 criteria. So Sue comes in, says, I haven't gambled for 3 months, okay? You're the new counselor for whatever reason. I haven't gambled for 3 months. I got this back under control. So, not suicidal. So what's your first goal here? No, what's your first goal? What's your first treatment goal? Maintain the arresting of the behavior. The behavior is arrested now for 3 months. We have early remission. We want to maintain that. So what are some of the ways we'll help Sue to maintain? Okay. So the standard relapse prevention work that we do, based on Alan Marlot's work. Anybody familiar with Marlot? Alan Marlot? Relapse prevention? Okay. So basic relapse prevention work. Okay. Want to do that. Yeah. Get in the fellowship. Get back in the fellowship. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we want to maintain the gambling abstinence, so coping skills. And again, this isn't the workshop on treatment, but, you know, coping skills, getting back in the fellowship, those kinds of things. Okay. What?
Like, for example, looking at her, she basically was successful.
Mm-hmm. Having a good life.
Yeah, living a good life. And then all of a sudden, somewhere down,
Something happened.
something happened that made her feel less than,
Yeah.
I would say. And so would you address, like, issue with self-esteem? Because if you're really doing well, why would you have low self-esteem?
Well, you're assuming she has low self-esteem. That may or may not be true. You don't know that she has low self-esteem.
I would have to ask that because I'm just saying somebody that's been successful all their life, and then all of a sudden, because I was just telling her, I said maybe she was feeling worthless, 57, never been married, no
Might be.
children,
It might be.
no
Might be.
depression.
So, but what you're suggesting is, besides maintaining the arresting of the behavior, that's not enough. There's a hole in this person's soul. Something's missing. So we have an existential journey to go on together, don't we? Okay. There's an existential journey we need to go on. We need to find what gives Sue a sense of meaning and purpose in her life. What happened? What happened? Sue's not been able to successfully establish what is the typical intimate relationship with a life partner. What happened? And how at age 57 can we begin going in that direction? So the arresting of the behavior is essential. But what you have to recognize with all addiction, but especially gambling, is that people with addiction, once you've arrested the behavior, you're frequently going to find a hole in their soul. Something's missing. Life got off on the wrong foot. I haven't fulfilled my potential. You know, I think spiritual models of recovery, the spiritual model of addiction is not as compelling an explanation as spiritual models of recovery. Spiritual models explaining how people get addicted, to me, are not compelling. But, and I'm a pastoral counselor, but spiritual models that explain recovery are compelling. And we have to be cautious that we don't cubbyhole spiritual models into just God talk. And I'm not against God talk. I like God. Apparently God likes me. Or so they say. But spiritual model is one in which people cultivate a sense of transcendent reality in this existence. You know, those crazy Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and Christians, Jains and Hindus, even the Zoroastrians, all see themselves as part of something bigger. And it's not just religion. It's not just religion. Patriotism. You know, on September 11th, 2001, we all felt part of something bigger than ourselves, right? We all felt that loss. This sense of transcendent reality, that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. Family. You know, I would die for my children, my wife. Okay? This is an important part of what it means to be human. If you've not read Man's Search for Meaning, please do. I mean, Viktor Frankl's right. People who have a why to live can withstand any how. You know, there's so many stories of Jews being led to the ovens, singing praise to God, and meaning it. Yeah. So, you know, the Sues of the world, can we arrest the gambling behavior? Can we help her to find her own soul, her own sense of self, her own, whatever you want to call it? That doesn't matter to me. One of the advantages to being a pastoral counselor is as soon as I say that, people know that spiritual talk can be on the table. Some people think that that means that I'm a Christian counselor or a Bible counselor, which I'm not. But I can talk that talk if that's what people need. That's fine. I'm not against that. But can we look at what gives meaning and purpose to your life? What makes you part of something bigger? And what would you die for? What would you sacrifice for? These are important things. And for the Sues of the world, you get the sense that that hasn't happened. And I can tell you at age 60, this is where my mind is. You know? My life's not as important as I got that little grandson. You know, that'll wake you up, having a grandson, you know. So don't overlook how important existential work is. Psychodynamic as well here, because it may be that Sue has a lot of unresolved family of origin relationship issues that have a strong psychodynamic component. So that may be very, very important as well. So this is what we were just doing. So we're getting close to the point where we're going to wrap up for the day. Let me open up the floor again for final questions and comments. And feedback as well. It's always good. Yes?
You made the comment about the spiritual model of addiction isn't as compelling as
Recovered.
the model of recovery. And I get the spiritual model of recovery in terms of when addiction has run its course,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that is part of the healing process. I was just wondering what you meant by the first.
Okay, I'm going back to William James. William James, the first great American psychologist, in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, talks a lot about spirituality and alcoholism. And James felt very strongly that the alcoholic is seeking spiritual connection with God. And so James understood addiction as having lost one's relationship with God and seeking it through stimulants. Bill Wilson read this book. It had an impact on him. Okay? So the spiritual model of the cause of addiction is a loss of relationship with God. The spiritual model of recovery, therefore, is reestablishment of relationship with God. Now, in my experience working with people in recovery from addiction who report feeling a strong sense of relationship with God or higher power or something greater than themselves, transcendent reality. And that can be the room, the fellowship in the room. It can be a lot of things. People who report that I have found to be much more resilient in their response to craving. Much greater resilience. So I think there's something very, very important there. And for a lot of people, it is phrased in very religious language. Okay, not always, not always. But this idea that the addiction was caused by a loss of relationship with God, or a relationship with God that was never established, there's nothing empirical to support that. And I'm very much an empiricist, and there may be truth to that. We do know that the God of the addicted person tends to be a more vengeful, judging, angry version of God, kind of the old Yahweh that, is going to smite the Philistines. But there's not a lot of evidence there. The strongest evidence for the causality of addiction gets to the genetic piece and then the trauma piece. Psychological trauma, genetic tendency to be impulsive and high-risk tolerant. Combine that with trauma, family of origin, dysfunction. And doesn't explain everybody with addiction, but explains most. So that's a much stronger explanation. For some people, though, framing that as having lost relationship with God, because there is also good research that one's image of God is very much bound in one's image of parent. So, especially male parent. And if male parent was physically, sexually, or emotionally abusive, then having somebody pray, "Our Father who art in heaven," ain't going to work very well now, is it? Okay. "O Lord in heaven," "O Mother who art in heaven," might work better. So, it may be a good way for the person to frame, and I'm completely in favor of whatever works. Whatever works, I'm for it. So the person may frame it in terms of my loss of relationship with God, and that's great. That's absolutely great. But we do find there's good evidence to support that, this sense of establishing a relationship with transcendent reality, however I define it. Very, very helpful. Very helpful. You got questions, man. That's good.
Yeah, just a reflection on what you're saying here, because as I'm thinking about it, I think you're right that for some people that might be helpful. For other people, it would be totally unhelpful.
Especially when you have somebody who grew up with a really, really negative image of God. God is angry, judgmental, God is sending me to hell, etc., etc., etc. Obviously, we're not going down that path. Now, what these folks might find when they get into 12-step meetings is people very gently saying, no, you got it all wrong. Yeah, and there can be that transition. And then you read John chapter 16, the woman caught in adultery, neither do I accuse you, in the future avoid this. And you say, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is not about judgment. Maybe it's not about that. There's a great book out there by Ernest Kurtz, K-U-R-T-Z, The God of the Alcoholic, and talks about this a lot. Okay, I forgot what I was talking about, so okay, go ahead.
I didn't finish the reflection. What I was thinking was that, I do believe that, as human beings, we're designed to be in right relationship with ourselves, with others, and God could be part of that too. But
Sure.
but even most people, I think, and even if we look at these scenarios, that somehow along the line, for whatever reason, the design of the way it was supposed to be somehow got corrupted.
Right.
And the correction would be the spiritual model of recovery,
Right.
which includes
Yeah.
reconnecting.
Yeah, and what 12-step groups do really, really well is they integrate the disease model, the spiritual model, and the psychological compensatory model. So you go to a 12-step meeting and you're really down and out, and somebody says, well, you have a disease. It's not your fault that you have the disease, but you're responsible for the recovery. Okay, you can't get rid of the disease, but you can arrest the behavior. And we're going to give you some, they don't say this, of course, some cognitive behavioral techniques to arrest the behavior. Here's a members list. Think the drink through. There's all those aphorisms in AA, and they're great. There's a lot of cognitive behavior work in AA before Aaron Beck invented cognitive behavior therapy. Okay, so you come in, you get the disease model, you get compensatory skills taught to you, and then gradually, as you do the step work, you get this idea that there's a higher power that actually is benign, and that the universe is not a frightful, horrible place, it's a benign place. And that you have a capacity to be loved and to love in return. Because at the end of the day, the only healing for chronic emotional distress, besides there's occasionally need for medications, of course, is to live in a world where we feel completely loved and capable of loving in return. George Vaillant, one of the 100 top psychologists as voted by the APA of the 20th century, did the Grant study. If you want to watch a wonderful video, Google George Vaillant, V-A-I-L-L-A-N-T. The Grant study was in Atlantic magazine a few years ago. It was the longitudinal study of Harvard graduates from 1942 or 3 through the early 2000s, a 60-year longitudinal study. And at the end of this interview, which was recorded about 5 or 6 years ago, the interviewer asked Vaillant, well, what did you learn? And he said, it's about love and relationships. If you want to be happy, it's love. End of story. Well, it is that simple.
What's the Google?
I would Google Vaillant, V-A-I-L-L-A-N-T, the Grant study, Atlantic magazine. Nice video. Of course, it's told much more simply by these guys, John and Paul. There's nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing you can. All you need is love. Nothing you can know that can't be known. Nothing you can show that can't be shown. You can learn how to be you in time. It's easy. All you need is love. That's what it gets down to. But the love we need is compassion. Okay. Well, I'm running out of material, and it's 4 o'clock, and 4:30 is unrealistic. Oh, you recorded that. Too bad. But you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. You have asked so many questions and made so many comments, and that makes this much richer, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much.